The spring transfer portal window has opened. Penn State football now down to a handful of practices to go before the blue-white game. Will the Nittany Lions lose any players to the portal before that? We'll find out. Or as the 10-day period starts, and you'll find out along with us if it happens here on this episode of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickel from Blue White Illustrated. It could be an interesting 60 minutes as we start this show at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, April 16th. No Penn State player has entered the portal during the spring transfer window, aside from offensive lineman J.B. Nelson, who, of course, left the Lions late last week and officially started the paperwork process earlier this week to go into the portal. I have not seen anything saying that he's officially in. I'm sure if that's not the case, it will be shortly. So the reserve offensive lineman moving on, James Franklin was asked about that last night. We'll get into that a little bit later in today's show following another Penn State open practice on Tuesday night. Heard from James Franklin and some other members of the Penn State program. So lots to cover as Penn State now sits a week and a half, maybe a little bit less away from the blue-white game. And T. Frank, as we come down the home stretch here of spring practice, plenty to talk about, plenty to get into, and the Nittany Lions continue to try and take the next steps as the 2025 season inches closer each day.
Yeah, we had the conversation yesterday on the show, and the general consensus I got from Nate and from Fitz was, we'll see. Like, we have no idea what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. I think we have maybe a better idea today, especially if you're a subscriber at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We got some ideas, but at the same time, we don't know. This is a very unpredictable time, so it's hard to sit here and tell you with any certainty anything is going to happen because there's multiple things at play here, right? So let's just lay this out in terms of the facts and the information. Penn State has to get down to 105 scholarship players.
May have to. That's the key.
Exactly.
Right.
May have to. But it's down to 105 scholarship players when they have 85. So that means they have the opportunity to add more scholarship players, whatever that means for this in this program and for what they want to do. The clear part that we've talked about is, what does that do for walk-ons? What does that do for the underpinning of the team, the players that help get the starters better?
Right.
That's all the dynamic. And then, of course, you throw on top of that the gasoline of the transfer portal. And so the conversation yesterday was, we have no idea how all these things are going to play out. And I think that was kind of the tone of the conversation. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but the tone tense, I would say, from James Franklin yesterday of how he's feeling about the portal, how he feels about this particular dynamic that his team is going through after what seemed like a good and competitive practice for the Nittany Lions on Tuesday evening.
Yeah, Penn State back inside Haluba Hall Tuesday on a very odd weather day in State College. I'm sure many of you around the East Coast experienced that as well. I think all four seasons presented themselves in State College and the surrounding areas on
the same
Tuesday.
Day.
Yeah, the weather kind of unpredictable on Tuesday, just like the transfer portal. Yeah, so let's just lay out all that here quick. So the portal opens today, closes April 25. Always remember that compliance departments have 48 hours to finish the paperwork. So that's why you could see guys still pop into the portal across the country as late as the Sunday after the blue-white game, April 27. The House versus NCAA settlement is not approved yet. So you're still waiting on all the aspects of that to be finalized in court. The judge there has talked about the idea of maybe grandfathering in roster limits, maybe changing that part of it. The indication from various national media outlets reporting is that that's probably not going to change that part of the settlement in terms of roster caps and having to be down to 105 by preseason camp, but we don't know yet. And I'm sure there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. So it puts a lot of people into a lot of interesting conflict. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out over the next 10 days. You know, I think that James Franklin said yesterday that Penn State has discussed its 105 plan should it need to use it during the first transfer window and after the second transfer window. He was not asked to go beyond that and explain what that plan was. And even if he would have been, he would not have shared it. So not really too much to learn on that front. But yeah, interesting time. It's been a little bit of a flurry of activity this morning nationally as we talk at 10:05 Eastern time on April 16 in terms of guys hitting the portal. West Virginia, I saw, had some guys go in. Virginia Tech has had some players go in. But I think throughout the day, it seems like that lunchtime to mid-afternoon hour is when a lot of these compliance departments finally get that paperwork through in the
They
necessary
file it
means
right
and
before
ways
lunch.
to get the portal updated. So stay tuned to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com throughout today as we learn how the portal will impact Penn State. But yeah, T. Frank, I think yesterday James Franklin started his news conference knowing that the portal questions were coming. And it was not the theme. Like, I thought it might take up the entire news conference. That was not the case, as you'll find out.
It was on
in
that
between the lines
path.
later. Right, it was on the path. Yes, after the
Yeah.
first, I think, 3 or 4 questions, it was trending that way pretty quickly, but not the full conversation there. Any other thoughts on this whole situation, T. Frank? Before we obviously we'll be dipping back and forth to this conversation throughout the show.
Yeah, it just reminds me. We think of most of life as these big machines, right? Like when you imagine the transfer portal, it's this very shadowy process of like government agencies and people in business suits and, you know, all of these like kind of Hollywood things. And a lot of times it comes down to somebody in an office filing paperwork. And that's all it is. Like somebody who probably like somebody's paperwork might not go in because they got a call because their kid was sick and they had to go pick them up from daycare or whatever. Somebody went to lunch early, so the paperwork went in or didn't. There's just, it becomes a little less mysterious, a little demystified when you just think of it as just a bunch of people doing things, which is, you know, now I'm getting into this like entirely unnecessary meta analysis of like, well, that's just life, is just people doing things. But it's kind of funny to just stop and think about the transfer portal. Just a bunch of people filing paperwork and shuffling it around.
Yes, and it's been like that since it started. Will that change? We'll have to wait and see eventually. Comment in the chat about, yeah, I mean, honestly, right now, we will, that's not the one I'm looking for. Same user, different one. We'll see. There's beyond the we'll see conversation. You can check out that information over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. It's $1 for 1 week of access, then build annually from there. So we have beyond the we'll see conversation up now over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, where again, it's just $1 for the first week of access, which gets you through a good chunk of the open transfer portal window for the spring. And obviously all the spring insight and intel coming out of the blue-white game later next week. So check us out, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. $1 for the first week, then build annually from there. We'll see what happens during the show here. We may see something, we may not. Yeah.
Wobble Wobble has no problem getting spicy in the chat. No problem with that whatsoever.
It is a spicy Wednesday, 11 days before the transfer portal, or I'm sorry, before the blue-white game, 10 days before the transfer portal closes. But like I said, we'll be dipping back and forth to that conversation here as the show unfolds. The last transfer portal window, as things currently stand, for 2025, before the 2025 season starts, but I don't know, man. They changed the rules a lot, so time will tell how things end up shaking out. All right, let's get into Penn State practice. Penn State was out on the practice field on Tuesday night. The Nittany Lions held their 10th spring practice, which means only 4 more to go before the blue-white game on April 26th. We'll find out more about what Penn State plans to do for that game next week when James Franklin talks, a week from today. But for the time being, T. Frank, back inside Haluba Hall. It's getting a little frustrating being inside Haluba Hall for all these practices, I must say.
Yeah.
There was some, it was a very similar evening to what we've seen previously, a lot of position-specific drills. They did some 2-on-2 stuff later in the session. We have practice notes up over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. But, again, I guess there were a couple of things that stood out to me. I'll lead off the bidding with this just from an observations perspective. I continue to be impressed every time I watch Stan Drayton. I was watching him put the running backs to a pass pro drill, and he is just very specific and very intentional about what he wants them to do. And you can tell that the running backs working under him have really picked up on that and really taken to heart his coaching. And it seems like it's not just lip service when guys like Nick Singleton and others talk about the fact that they really are buying into how he's coaching. So we'll see what that looks like on the field a little bit later next week. But other than that, if you're watching on YouTube, you saw some pass pro there from the running backs. You're checking out defensive back drills right now. You saw some linebacker work earlier, some offensive line, defensive line one-on-ones. Competitive practice. James Franklin has said multiple times this spring, T. Frank, that he feels like it's as competitive as it's been between the offense and the defense. Cliche, yes. But I think we see that during these one-on-one periods maybe more than we have in the past. Maybe it's just a recency bias of the comments, but it does feel that way.
Yeah, and well, we've gotten to see more of those one-on-ones this spring than we have at any point during the
Right.
last probably 3 or 4 years. I think maybe 3 years ago. It was definitely pre-COVID. I think the last time we got to see extended one-on-ones during like training camp. So I want to start actually because I have a chance to watch the defense for the first time. I spent more of my time with the defense, and the defensive line, all of the defensive line was doing ball drills, meaning they were trying to intercept the football. So defensive tackles and defensive ends. We've talked a lot about Jim Knowles and his defense and what he's looking for from the from the jack position, from that hybrid defensive end position. James Franklin, last year when they brought in Tom Allen, we had a similar conversation, and Tom Allen said, well, there are so many talented players on this roster. I just didn't have to choose one guy or one position. They're all going to do those sort of things. So trying to piece together what the plan is on defense from some of these positions and some of these ideas. I just have the thought in my head, how many hybrid positions is too many hybrid positions? Because there are multiple opportunities for that on the roster, from safety, defensive end. How many ways can you stir the batter before you don't have cake anymore? And so I'm that's the part I'm interested in. I was trying to get an eyeball on, and I was getting kind of a view of the defensive secondary. They were working on some shell drills, and then all of a sudden they're doing one-on-ones with pass rush, and I had to abandon that and go and get the video for you guys that you can see here on the YouTube channel. So, I thought it was interesting to watch them go through some stuff, and I haven't been with the defense for a while, so I don't know if they've been doing that even last year of the actual, like, not just dropping and getting into a spot, but dropping around a bag, doing more coverage stuff from that perspective. It's just a small sample size, but it was curious. I found that interesting as kind of the off the top of my head. Watching the background of these videos reminded me of that when we were at practice yesterday.
Yeah, the Penn State defensive line, of course, is led by Deion Barnes, but there's a lot of guys working with that group, including a couple former players and things like that. So a lot of eyes there for Jim Knowles to trust, and I guess that leads us into the Jim Knowles conversation. He spoke after practice. T. Frank, we might as well get into that. But you watch Jim Knowles at practice. You've heard us talk about this on previous Wednesday shows, but he is watching everything. He is not really. He will from time to time shout some instructions or get directly involved in a drill, but generally speaking, and he said as much last night, he is puts a lot of time, effort, and so on and so forth into setting the practice plan, and his expectation is for his assistants to go out and implement that practice plan, and for the players to take what they talked about in the meeting room and apply it on the field. And then he is watching, taking notes for the football version of an after action plan, and then they just rinse, repeat, and do it all over again. Thought it was interesting. T. Frank, he said basically he wants every day to be like a game day. And so he's not on the field on game day. He is up in the coach's box, calling the plays, of course, from there, watching on the iPad, getting feedback from field level, things like that. And he genuinely treats a practice exactly like he would, obviously he's walking on the field. He's not in a, like a lift or anything at practice, up with the video guys and gals. But essentially,
he had like a little rolly cart where he was 10 feet above everybody else, just driving around, like one of those things at Home Depot where they had to go get the thing from the top shelf.
Yes, but I mean, other than that, it's pretty much exactly, if he did have one of those, and what he's doing on the field are almost exactly a carbon copy. Just an interesting way to go about things based on how we've seen past defensive coordinators handle things during practice.
Sorry, repeat that again.
Yeah, I'm just saying. It's an interesting way that he goes about practice in terms of, we've seen Manny Diaz on the ground, demonstrating a fumble drill. We've seen Tom Allen working on a tackling drill, things like that. And for Jim Knowles, it is very much observational, note taking. Again, he will bark some instructions from time to time, but he expects his assistants to be the leaders of their groups on the field.
Yeah, and I think that's a commander doesn't get into the weeds and give every single one of his soldiers instructions. He has people he delegates to, and I think that's a good way to work if you're the defense coordinator, because he's a guy, I get the sense, and I've talked about this on the show before, I get the sense he is a big picture kind of guy, and so he wants to see everything. He wants to have kind of pull the strings, and you can't do that if you are down in it on exactly one detail. He's a guy that wants to have the kind of big picture view so he can move the pieces around the board correctly. It's the creativity of the play calling. It's the creativity of understanding the talents of the players and how to best apply them. And so I think that's just kind of this approach. Manny Diaz did it a little bit differently. And I guess this is the conversation I've been having in my head of the creativity, the kind of structure of the defense as an idea is closer in spirit to Manny Diaz, where Manny Diaz focused, it felt like a lot on the front seven. Blitzes, everyone has their forte, their specialty, what they like. He created a system that was built on pressure and dictating to the defense or to the offense where the ball is going to go. And for Jim Knowles, it feels like it's not as much about pressure. It's about not giving an option to the quarterback, making the quarterback see ghosts. And he does that through coverage and some of the things that I talked to him about. I asked him about versatility. And he was very clear when he said, because I said that the nickel position and the slot, and he said that nickel position, our third safety, or I guess sometimes it comes from the corner room. I know that seems like not a big deal, but that means something very specific. Three safeties have to do safety level things. So if you're going to be playing that position, you have to play deep. You have to play a deep third. You have to play zone coverage from that perspective. You have to be able to play the run, and you have to be able to cover in the slot in man coverage. That's what creates the secret sauce in this defense from what I've been able to watch on film. So those are kind of the specific of what he's looking for from this defense, and the why of why he's taking this kind of, in my opinion, this kind of backfield approach of looking at everything from on high, because he's focusing on the secondary and the coverage and how it all interacts with what the quarterback is seeing.
You talked to him and asked James Franklin about the secondary situation for Jim Knowles in 2025 at Penn State. Obviously, the Lions lose KJ Winston and Jalen Reed. They return Zachy Wheatley, some other guys that got their feet wet in that room at safety last year. You lose Jalen Kimber at cornerback. You have AJ Harris back. Elliott Washington, of course, has been a star of the spring. King Mack is back at safety. We could go on and on, just run down names. But what did you learn from those conversations, T. Frank, about the secondary plan, I guess you could say, or how Jim Knowles and James Franklin feel about that look so far at the end of 10 spring practices?
So I'll start just with my assessment. I just think that they're taking well to his coaching. I feel like there's a good mix of the talent on the roster and what he can do with that talent because of what I just explained of like that coverage-centric approach. You've got three really good corners who've been playing really well in front of us at the very least. And then, of course, you've got the secondary with a senior in Zachy Wheatley, and then super talented guys, King Mack and Dejon Lane. Both those guys, very physically talented in different packages. And so that was my question is, do you feel like this is going to be a strength? How's that matchup going? And what James Franklin said is, we've just got more answers than we did previously. And that means personnel, because I feel like they've got enough corners and safeties this year where they feel like they can actually deploy what they wanted to do, because there's no change from what Penn State wanted to be in 2024 to what they're going to be under Jim Knowles in 2025. They just didn't have enough safeties to run it. So they went back to a traditional nickel defense with a slot corner who did slot corner things, which is different. So when he's talking about we just have more answers, I think Jim Knowles provides you more answers because of that versatility and his insistence. And this is me reading between the lines of what James Franklin said. This isn't something we're going to get to in just a minute. It's the insistence on we're going to do that plan. Where it doesn't matter if you're going to be a corner or you're a safety. We're going to have this coverage, ambiguity, and versatility because that's what makes this defense hard to defend. I think that's a really encouraging sign to me that they're going to be able to. There's a question of can they be as good as they were last year without Abdul Carter and losing some of that talent? And if they don't have as good of a pass rush, I think this is the way they are able to replicate a good defense with I don't want to say a better plan because it makes it sound like Tom Allen didn't have but there are certain levels to this, right? And I think Jim Knowles can develop week to week a better plan with more options and more tools.
And we'll be interested to see how that all plays out. Obviously, Penn State was looking for something different than what it ended up with very early in the 2024 season when KJ Winston went down with what was ultimately a season-ending injury that ended his time at Penn State. So, Penn State is still working through safety, rotation, things like that, and getting to where it wants to be under Jim Knowles. But yeah, it was interesting to hear him talk on Tuesday night. Some other things he touched on. I know you spent most of your time with him. I did as well. He's
Couldn't
happy.
hear anything.
Yeah, he is very soft spoken. Yes, he is very very soft spoken. It was tough to hear. There's no doubt about that. But what we could, but in all seriousness, we could hear plenty of it and what he had to say about sort of just getting used to this Penn State program. Very complimentary of James Franklin, of the assistant coaches he has here. And you can say on one hand, well, what else would he have to say? But when James Franklin said, I think it was at his first news conference of the spring, that Jim Knowles is a man of few words, he is. And so the ones he does decide to, share with reporters and in public, things like that, I think should be taken in that context. That this guy doesn't say much, but when he does, it's worth listening. And he had maybe his highest praise for Dan Connor, if obviously linebacker U legend who is leading the Penn State linebackers for the last couple of years. He just mentioned how he played at the NFL, what he did in college, how he can relate to the guys. So certainly those were some of the things, T. Frank, from Knowles that were takeaways. He did not get into, at least while I was there, and I was there for a good chunk of it, a ton regarding specific players. And I think that 10 practices into his first spring, that's okay, because I think he's still learning as he goes to some extent and evaluating. And, he's a guy that every time he talks, I think he's going to come off. I could be wrong about this. I will revisit this comment down the road once we have a few more interactions with him. But I feel like he's going to come off as a guy who makes very clear to you that he doesn't always have every piece of the puzzle to answer your question. And he might be one of those guys that may never be able to find enough puzzle pieces to fully dive into it. But linebackers he talked about, Anthony Specca was a guy he gave a shout out to, said he's very instinctual and is taking a step this spring. He said Keon Wiley has flashed recently, player coming off an injury, getting back in the rotation there. And he gave a shout out to Dom DeLuca too. So those guys in the middle have caught his eye. He talked a little bit about the defensive line, but I'm not sure if you caught more of what he had to say about the pass rush. I bounced over to, I think, Elliot Washington at that point. But generally speaking, good interview, certainly with Jim Knowles.
I think there was also a certain amount of, what do you know about this player? What do you know about that player? Maybe you don't know as much about those players because they're not out there. I mean, there's a certain coyness, I think, to what he was trying to say in some of those. But he is a straight shooter in an era of people that just say hot takes as straight shooting. He is like the original straight shooter of a guy that will tell you if I don't know yet, because he's still trying to figure out. There's a lot of versatility in this defense of, okay, so we're trying to pry out the ideas and tease out what this is going to look like. And maybe he's still developing, okay, maybe one player works here and this could work in my defense this way, but is there enough resiliency in the depth chart for that to work out long term? And then how many of these, like I said, how many of these versatile guys do you play on in any game, and who are you going to feature? He's talked about running plays on defense. And I think, again, that's where it's similar to Manny Diaz, where it felt like there was an intentionality to dictate to the offense what is about to happen based on what we're going to do. And so we know Tony Rojas hasn't been available. That's a guy you design plays around. Are you designing plays around Zakee Wheatley? Are you designing plays around King Mack, Dejon Lane? I think that's the part he's still learning of. Who are the best players that have the most interesting skills that I can then leverage to make the offense give me the football? And so I think there's a little bit of both sides of the coin there in terms of discussing what he knows and what he wants to not talk about that is pretty important to the plan.
Yes, and Jim Knowles will not talk about things if he does not want to. He's made that very clear. So, like I said, good chat with him. We're going to get into between the lines here in just a sec, but any final defensive thoughts, T. Frank, before we move on to what will be more of an offense conversation with James Franklin?
Watching the pass rushing drills, if you saw some of the highlights there, we're going to put them out here and there over the next couple of weeks here on the YouTube channel. I was impressed with LeVar Arrington. He got 2 clean wins in pass rushing. That's what he's best at. right? So he is not going to be a pass rusher necessarily in terms of this year he's playing edge. Could he play that in the future? I don't know. But that's clearly what he did in high school. That's what he is best at. And when we got a chance to see him do those things, as opposed to the coverage, understanding the complexities of playing in space, which he's moving just slowly mentally through that process, when he gets to just do what he's used to doing, you see the talents come through. That is not to say that he's going to be Abdul Carter in year one. It's just you can see the excitement, the ability, the explosiveness. He needs to get bigger for all of those things to turn into dynamic traits. But I think like you're encouraged. Every time I watch him, I'm encouraged for the future. So I'm seeing a guy that's going to be really good in 2026 or 2027 with all the tools he's bringing to the table and how quickly he's picking some of these things up.
Yes, LeVar Arrington will continue to be the talk of the offseason, along with some other younger defensive players who have made some noise so far in spring practice. And again, you can check out more of our practice notes and observations over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, where it's $1 for 1 week of access and then billed annually from there. T. Frank, James Franklin spoke for the, I think, fourth time this spring. Is that right? I believe. Fourth time this spring. A couple more news conferences with him to go before and after the blue-white game. But let's get into what he had to say. It's time for Between the Lines on this episode of BWI Live.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
All right, James Franklin's full news conference video is over on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, which, of course, if you're watching here with us, you can find it there. If not, if you're on the podcast version of the show, check it out, bluewhiteillustrated.com, or on YouTube, search Blue White Illustrated, and it'll pop right up for you. Let's go back to the portal conversation. We are 27 minutes into today's show. It's 10:27 Eastern Time on April 16. No new portal movement for Penn State as we get ready to hear from James Franklin talk about what the situation is with the portal. So let me just set this up. And this was, I think, if I know which clip we're about to play here, he was asked about the plan for the transfer window and said that it was different from the winter one because they were in negotiations then. And it was one of the first of a couple times he mentioned that the plan for this window is basically, don't shock us. Don't go off book. Don't go off script. Don't come out of nowhere and say you're upset. Let's talk about these things ahead of time. And so here you can hear James Franklin say a little bit more about that and what they are trying to create at Penn State in this portal for this spring window.
It's really kind of a no surprises discussion. And what I mean by that, if the players have any issues or concerns, we want them to come in and talk to us. We've talked already to the team about how we're handling the 105. That was addressed before the first window. That was addressed before this window, so everybody is on the same page. The other thing, as you guys know, I meet with the players a lot, and there needs to be a communication two-way street. So right now, we're not having meetings, obviously during spring ball, but there needs to be communication.
All right, so a couple of takeaways there. The first one, as we mentioned earlier in the show, is that James Franklin did say last night that they have communicated with the roster the plan for the 105-man roster limit that could come into play via the House versus NCAA legal case settlement if that is approved, which we still have no clarity on as we sit here and talk today. But he gave no details beyond that. But then the no surprise part of things, I think, to me, sounds great in theory. I just wonder how well it works in practice, and I think there's probably some give and take there for sure. I can't imagine if you have 100. I mean, right now Penn State has 119 guys on its online roster. There's some, the number's a little bit higher than that because there's some signees that didn't show up yet. But I guess what I'm getting at here is it really realistic to expect that if you have 119 guys thinking this, that, or the other thing, and obviously we're not talking about the whole list here because so many of them have decided to come back already, blah, blah, blah. But if you have 119 guys, can you really genuinely, realistically believe that at least one or two of them might blindside you at some point and shock you? And I think that's just kind of the way it goes. And obviously Penn State, James Franklin, its fans, you all watching this, want everything to run as ideally and as smoothly and as close to the plan as possible. In reality, it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah, and that's what I think he was saying is when he says it's a two-way street. He wants Penn State despite the era of the portal, to operate primarily the way it has for its entirety of its existence as a developmental program where young men come to Penn State to become men. And that the whole encompassing thing. You only get that if the players don't hold you hostage.
Right.
In this negotiating window. They have to buy into that as well. And they also have to have some of the fortitude against the temptation. And certain people have people in their ear that are telling them to not listen to the coaching staff and to not buy into that plan.
Right.
And so when they talk about it's a two-way street, don't blindside us, don't like, there are all these temptations that we all have in life, and we all have a plan generally. Hopefully all of us have a plan of like what we are trying to accomplish in our lives. And then if you just go wildly off script because you had an impulse or because somebody got in your ear, that changes things for the people around you. And that's the conversation here. That was his entire, I think, message in the first 5 minutes of the conversation to all of the questions about what's the plan. Let's at least stick to the plan, but he can't control that. He can't control that everyone sticks to the plan because you're right, Greg. There's going to be somebody who gets contacted by somebody in the portal and gets the idea in their head that there are millions of dollars out there for that player. And that's true or that's not true. I don't know that. And I don't think most of us know that. But the conversation is absolutely out there, and those poaching opportunities are happening. So basically resist the temptation and let's all stick to the plan here is kind of what I got from the conversation.
Exactly right, T. Frank. It's let's stick to the plan. That's the hope. That's the goal. And again, if you hit, they're almost impossible to hit 100% on this kind of stuff. But I think, man, if you're hitting in the 85, 90% range, and that may even be a little high, but if you're in that ballpark, man, I'm telling you, I think that you are doing about as well as can be expected in 2025 college football. So, yeah, that was the portal message from James Franklin on Tuesday night. And again, we'll hear from him again next week with a few days left to go in the transfer portal window. But yeah, ultimately all Penn State can do is try and run things the way it has been for the last couple of years as NIL and the portal became a thing, and just hope that the culture they've built and the things they've instilled in the program and with the players and things like that carries over and keeps things in line one way or the other. I mean, look, it's a reality of the situation. We talk about this sometimes in other sports, but some guys are going to feel like they either didn't get the opportunity to show they can play or just aren't going to get the opportunity to show they can play. And so at some point, they might decide to move on. They might try and find a better opportunity elsewhere.
Right.
And it's easier said than done to, blame a guy for doing that. Some have better reasons than others for leaving. There's no question about it. But as long as that communication street is open, and look, it's not every single one of these guys talking to James Franklin about it, but whoever you're close with on the staff, a GA, an analyst, a position coach, whatever, it's about keeping those lines of communication open so James Franklin does not find himself surprised. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to go about these things. But, yeah, that was the main takeaway. He was not overly interested in talking a ton of portal stuff, but he made that part of things very clear.
So there's two things I think that are part of this conversation. You're absolutely right. Where guys read the depth chart that is written, right? If you watch practice, we've talked about this on offense. There are pods where you're in the first team pod, you're in the second team pod, or you're on the scout team freshman pod. And so, if you're a junior who's in that second team, am I going to play? Like, what's the reality of me being able to see the field in my junior season? Defensively, there's a similar pecking order, right? Of who goes first through drills, who's lining up with the first team. When you do competitive periods, are you with the third team? Those things happen, and that is also part of this transfer portal window conversation. I think they've done their best to mitigate that without hiding it, right? You can't hide the preferences that you're seeing based on play, or else you have no leg to stand on to say this is a meritocracy and a merit-based business. But at the same time, I think Franklin made it clear last night in his kind of standoffishness or his two-way street thing is they will work with players, but they are not going to negotiate. Like they're not going there's I don't want to say a zero tolerance policy. He said like every player, we're not going to do a one size fits all rule, but he made it very clear of like we're not going to be playing games here. Is the vibe I got from what he was saying.
Yeah, and it's consistent with the way they handled the Bo Prabula situation in terms of they tried their best to make that work, and they understood why Bo was going to go. And at the end of the day, I think they put a plan in place and thought it was going to work and then realized it wasn't going to. And that was the point they decided to go their separate ways with a playoff run going on. And so it just is what it is. And again, they try and do the best they can with the planning and with the things that they know and have discussed and have. And then just kind of let it play out from there. All right, that is the transfer portal conversation, part 2 of this show. Part 3, we'll see. But T. Frank, let's move on to the offensive line and see what Penn State for Coach James Franklin had to say. It's going to interest some people, I think, about an offensive lineman who came to Penn State as a highly ranked recruit. Maybe hasn't made as much noise early in his career, but maybe on the cusp of doing so. It's Alex Birchmeier. Here's what James Franklin had to say about him.
I think he's one of these guys, and everybody's journey is different. You guys hear me talk about that a lot. You know, the light has gone on for him. We've seen a huge improvement for him at the end of last fall, winter workouts, and then this spring as well. Obviously, a guy that we've always thought very, very highly of. And everybody's process is different. The game is starting to slow down for him. He's got a really good feel of what we're asking him to do, and we see flashes of some really good stuff. So like all these guys, it's about consistency, but he's flashing some really good stuff right now.
I have a thought on the end of that conversation we're going to get to here in a sec, but T. Frank, give me your initial impression of that comment about Alex Birchmeier.
I have no impressions. I have nothing. It's just the update that every single fan, I swear 100% of the questions that we've ever gotten about Penn State football have been about Alex Birchmeier. Obviously, I'm joking. But like this has been what fans have wanted to know. What about this high 4-star, almost 5-star offensive lineman? Everyone's very excited about him. We talked about him as somebody whose game was mature on the high school level, but on the high school level is very different than on the college level. And so, yeah, there are things that take you by surprise. Of a guy who looked like he was mature for his age in high school, didn't transition quickly to college. And when fans ask us for an update and there is no answer, it's how do I say this? We're not here to bash kids that aren't performing well. We're not here to say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything, is sometimes the hint you need to take when we're having these conversations. And again, for a freshman offensive lineman, that is not a problem. Like that's almost the expectation of where you should expect the player to be, is in that realm of he's got his baby deer legs underneath him and he's trying to find his way. And so finally we have something good to relate. And James Franklin related that the light has come on and he looks better. And we've seen those things I mentioned, I think last week in this show, like Alex Birchmeier flashed some good things of just moving through drills with more confidence. It's not even that you can see the one-on-ones, and he did have a one-on-one rep yesterday that we were able to observe, but just the I know what I'm doing vibe that you get from somebody, it is palpable with him. In the weight room, we saw it. He looks better. He's not materially different, but you can tell his body has changed where he's stronger. He's got more power in his legs. And, then you see that confidence in the way he pulls and blocks because the technique is correct, and he's obviously not thinking about it. So good stuff on Alex Birchmeier. I was happy to deliver this. I don't have any in between the lines on it. I was just very happy to give fans what they wanted to hear about Alex Birchmeier.
Yes, and a good reminder that not everyone has the same path as Cooper Cousins. Like, one thing you hear James Franklin consistently say is when guys, and I can't remember if he started this, I think he did, started this answer with this quote, but, guys have different journeys, they have different paths. And for every Cooper Cousins who Drew Shelton told me still stays and works out until like 11 o'clock at night and 11:30 at night, and then I don't think he does literally anything but train, eat, study, and football. But anyway, for every Cooper Cousins, there's a guy like Alex Berksmeyer, who's a highly rated recruit, and he's not the only one that's come in on either side of the offensive or defensive line and has had to take a little bit longer to get to this stage. But that's okay. That's normal, actually.
Yeah.
That is very normal. And we forget that that's very normal because we look at some guys, whoever it may be, a Cooper Cousins, a Max Granville, and not everyone is in that same, that same path to seeing the field.
Yeah.
So certainly it's a good reminder on that front as we move into another thing that we've often been reminded about, and that's the Penn State receivers. James Franklin was asked about the difference between the receiving group last year and this year. Obviously, there's some very basic ones. Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross in, Wallace. Rather, if I could say that. And Omari Evans, who went to Washington, is what I was trying to get my brain around, are out. Liam Clifford back, of course, some other guys still here, some freshmen that have come in. James Franklin asked about what difference there is between pass catchers last year and this year. Here's what he had to say.
I think year two, within the scheme, I think Andy gotten a better personnel of who we have across the offensive board, not just at wide receiver. Marcus now been here for a number of years. Mark Dupuis helping out there as well. So I think Drew's got a big part in that as well. What we're able to do in the off season this summer is going to be really important. We need some of these young guys that have been in the program, kind of like we talked about a quarterback, to take the next step, and we think they will. I think the two transfer portal guys have come in here and increased the competition across the board.
And then he went on to mention the fact that Kyron Hudson has done it at this level and brings one kind of a competition skill set into Penn State. Devontae Ross, he called his improvement dramatic since arriving at Penn State and having access to the resources of Big Ten power program like Penn State has compared to Troy, where he did some good things against Big Ten competition, namely Iowa, despite being at a little bit of a lower level. So takeaway there, T. Frank. I thought it was an interesting answer.
Yeah.
And again, you can check the whole thing out as well as all of James Franklin's comments at bluewhiteillustrated.com and also here on the YouTube channel, though. We'd appreciate if you'd like and subscribe and stick with us through the end of this edition of BWI Live. Then go do that. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. We got a new segment to end the show, something I'm trying out, which we'll explain when we get there. But to your question,
to
really
me and to all of you, so I look forward to that.
It literally I had the idea 10 minutes before the show, so it's going to be super sloppy. I'm excited for how bad it's going to be. So the first part of that answer, I think, is something that I've been picking up on. I've been having conversations about that. I took for granted last year that the offense ran so efficiently. There were so many fewer mental mistakes than I expected from the offense overall, from the quarterback on down, that everyone got the plan. Like the install of the offense can be complex, and there were very few shaky moments from process that everyone kind of forgot it was a first year of the offense. And James Franklin talked about here that it's year two for Andy Kotelnicki. So he has a better idea of the strengths and weaknesses. He's stress tested some of the things he can do with the players. And so he knows better how to use the talent. And they scouted and selected these transfer receivers. He knows the general talent of the roster overall from the O-line, et cetera. So the offense, to me, and this is something I talked about with Danny O'Brien last week, what's the offensive personality? How's those things going to change? I have my opinion of what I've seen, that I think they're headed in a good direction for this, but it also relates to the receivers, to the quarterback, putting everyone in a better position to succeed because you understand who they are a little bit better. And that's something I took for granted in year one, expecting Andy Kotelnicki to just, work magic in his first year. And I think some of those things do take some time. And then the second thing was, James Franklin put some of the onus on the quarterback. Part of that is to organize off-season work during the summer. So that's what he was specifically talking about in the summer, of making sure that the progress they're making in the spring continues, solidifies, and enhances on their own in those kind of individual work, that the extra stuff they have to do on their own. And then just the quarterback being better. Like, the quarterback has to also take a step. So there's a multi-layered approach to the receiver position where, kind of like the defense, maybe the talent doesn't increase dramatically, but the output can increase dramatically or noticeably because they're using the tools better. and there's a better plan this year from Andy Kotelnicki, which I think from a coaching perspective, you should expect coaches to get better and have a better awareness of everything in year 2.
Yeah, I'm at the point, James Franklin a couple years ago refused to talk about the offensive line, said, I'll let you guys see it on the field, and they'll do the talking on the field. I'm at that point. We can go that route with the receivers.
I've had a 15-minute conversation with people on the message board. We've gone back and forth on this. Like, I still have clips. I still have bullets in the clip when it comes to the receiver conversation. But overall, I would agree with you. It's getting to the end.
Yes. Penn State is going through, and again, I guess I'll point out 2 things quick. Marcus Hagans, Mark Dupuis, really working hard with that receivers group. James Franklin, again, saying that some guys need to take the next step. I think we could go back and find clips of that very 2 words coming from James Franklin about some receiver or receivers for like 3 straight years. So that continues to pop up. And we'll see. I mean, I think the vibe's probably a little bit better, and I looked at the rundown. I think I'm teasing the next segment maybe, but I think the vibe around this group is better this spring through 10 practices than maybe I thought it was going to be. And does that translate to more or less good things on the field come blue-white game day and come the fall? Obviously, we're a ways off from not so much the blue-white game, but certainly the season. But certainly time will tell, but I think – ultimately, Penn State has added 2 receivers from the portal. It's added some guys in the class of 2025. Could it add more receivers in the spring portal window? We'll see. Again, not to go back to the portal conversation, but I would caution everyone that despite what you may hear, think, read, or otherwise, that this could end up being another dud of a spring transfer portal window for Penn State, like some others have. That's just kind of the way it works. So time will tell. But Penn State is in the portal window, in the home stretch of spring practice, and it's time for us to unveil a new segment that, like I said, I'm going to learn about all together with you, our listeners and viewers, and thanks, of course, for being here. So, T. Frank, we got like a graphic to lead this thing off? Or
let me take control of this one. Here, I'll set it up. Greg is a reporter. Ryan, Fitz, Nate, they all work on the facts they know and they can say here on the show. And so I want to create a space where we can just talk. And like when I play this, there are absolutely no consequences to the conversation. These are not facts. These are opinions based on the vibes we're getting. This is called Good Vibes, Bad Vibes. Are you getting good vibes or are you getting bad vibes from a particular conversation, topic, opinion, thing that's happening? Again, play that. 0 consequences for your actions here, Greg. So just some conversations we've had. Good vibes or bad vibes? Let's start with James Franklin, because in the chat, somebody asked earlier about his vibes in spring football. Let me see. JC Cunningham says, in general, Franklin sounds more relaxed, constructive this spring compared to recent ones. Agree or disagree? I'll ask you differently. Good vibes or bad vibes from James Franklin?
I keep all the vibe I can think of at the moment is all the vibrating my phone and watch keep doing during this show. And every time I look down, there's no new transfer portal news for Penn State. Yes, I guess that'll be later. Good vibes for James Franklin this spring. So he continues to not only be willing to discuss big picture things that are affecting the sport of college football, like he talked yesterday about his preference for one transfer portal window and some of the things that impact that, to the small, minute things like getting into some specific players, like in the most recent examples, in Alex Birchmeier or whoever. I can't honestly remember who else he was asked about last night. That's which is terrible because it was only
Javen Williams. I think
Javen
was
Williams, yeah.
No, Drew Shelton.
Recently,
Drew Shelton.
Yeah, Drew Shelton last night. Javen Williams recently. So good vibes. I think he feels good about where things are. I think we all have to realize that this spring, Penn State is without some guys. You mentioned Denai Dennis Sutton earlier in the show. We know that Tony Rojas is working his way back. Things like that they're going to have to work guys through the summer to get them ready for preseason camp. But I think it's good. I think I don't know if this kind of counts, but I think James Franklin, and I get good vibes about him in part because you get good vibes when you're out at practice. When you're out there and watching the different drills, things like that. Very intentional. Again, what would you expect, right? Like, it's spring practice, of course, but I just get a sense that these guys know what they're expected to do this year, and they know what they have to do to earn that. And it started in winter workouts, but it continues now. And I get the sense, T. Frank, that these guys are aware of that, and James Franklin and his coaches have instilled that in them, which is why you're seeing it on the practice field. So good.
Do you have any? I've got a couple here, but do you have any that you want to throw out here into the vibe ecosphere?
Not at the moment. Let's run through yours, and I'll think about it. Yes.
Okay, so let's go to defensive tackle. Good vibes or bad vibes about the Penn State defensive tackle situation?
Yeah, I'll think of some to throw volley back and forth here. And I'll let you answer this one too. Questionable to. It's it's hard to say. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, only because of the fact that we've had so many indoor practices, and that group works at the furthest corner of the field. So I feel like I have a better feel for how the receivers, the running backs, the quarterbacks, even some of the safeties and stuff cornerbacks have been going through preseason practices. The three hardest groups to get a read on when we're inside are the tight ends, the offensive line, and the defensive line. They're on the opposite side of the field, tucked away in a corner. And so I wish I had some of that to lean on. But
Greg,
you look at,
remember,
there's no
consequences.
There's no
just
consequences
vibes,
until there
man.
are. Yeah,
just
vibes.
Don't be Nate. Play the game.
Can't be neutral. Z-Man says. I look. It's
here,
if you had one of those,
I'll save you for it. I'm going bad vibes, and also I wanted to play the bad vibes so everyone knows what the options look like.
Yeah, so if there was a meter here, a red, yellow, green meter, mine would be teetering a little bit towards the red, and I'd be closer to the middle than the red. But
sure,
you look at that, you just wonder about the numbers there. You wonder about if the guys they lost maybe did not get enough credit for what they did, and you wonder about. I think you look at this roster. It's a pretty good number. I have it up here, so let me just talk my way through this if I can find it. You talk about the freshmen and the young guys at receiver that need to take a next step. Well, defensive tackle is certainly one of them. You have Ty Blanding, a redshirt sophomore, Xavier Gilliam, a redshirt freshman. Liam Andrews and DeAndre Cook, two redshirt freshmen. Randy Adarica's a freshman. You bring in Owen Wafel, who's a freshman, a redshirt freshman rather. You just don't know a lot about these guys after Zane Durant. And some more than enough to feel good about Alonzo Ford. But then after that, then what?
But that's my point here. That's exactly my point. If I'm putting it in kind of the bad vibes, because the last time Penn State was thin at veterans at defensive tackle, where it's like you've got to get something out of X, because you're then into the weeds of, hey, these are young guys we like, but we don't know anything about them, who turned into Javon Ellies and guys later in their career, Keziah Izzard later in their year. But in 2021, they had PJ Mustipher and Derek Tangelo. And then it was
Fitz's guy.
To
Derek
a bunch
Tangelo,
of young guys who were unproven and were green. And so that's why I'd say, like, I'm just getting bad vibes from the conversation when we're talking about young guys that are on a team that has national championship aspirations. I think Xavier Gilliam saves this conversation from being 2021. But if we're saying just generally, I'm getting a little bit of the bad vibes from the fact that we're talking about freshmen and we're talking about guys that have never played before that are going to get into the 2 deep and are going to be 3 and 4 on that 2 deep, because one of the guys you're counting on is Alonzo Ford, who's injured. So I hate being the bad vibes police, but I don't have great vibes about that. Okay, so let's go back to, we've had the conversation about what James Franklin had to say about all the things that we know of the facts. What are your vibes around the Penn State portal situation?
So are we talking like overall, incoming, outgoing, the whole 9 yards?
Yes, because I didn't think about it.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with good. And I think
right.
if we were using different levels of good, fine would be a more accurate description. But I'm starting to get just a sense that maybe this portal window won't be as crazy as, like, I think going into it, you think about the potential roster limits. you think about the way some of the positions stack up in terms of the depth chart, and older guys maybe not being in the ones or as high, the twos even to some extent. And so I think there was a natural feeling as this day grew closer, this opening day of the spring transfer portal window. I think that there was this maybe belief that it was going to be a massive rush to go into the portal, both Penn State guys and guys across the country. And I'm just not seeing it right now. I mean, like I said, my phone and my watch has been buzzing almost the entire hour here. And some of it's been new entries to the transfer portal, but a lot of it's just been buzz about guys who are already in. And so I think Penn State will get through this okay from a loss perspective. What I can't tell you is, number one, will there be somebody or somebody's out there Penn State both wants and can afford? We'll have to just wait and see what's out there. I know that every time a guy goes in, it's you draw a straight line and say, well, he makes sense. I know the defensive lineman from North Carolina is a popular one in that regard right now.
Yep.
But the thing I can't tell you is if that NCAA versus House settlement is done at some time over the next, let's just say 8 days, 7 days, 6, whatever. How does that change things? If they come out and say 100% you have to be at 105, I feel like that changes the conversation pretty dramatically. Whereas right now, at least in my mind, if you're one of those guys who think you might be on the cusp, you can continue to go through spring practice, continue to fight for your position, and then maybe you have a decision to make at the end of next week, even if it's just throwing your name in for the safety factor of saying, okay, I played by the rules, I'm good, and if I need to go, I have the opportunity to. So right now, good. Like I said, fine would probably be a better description, but I think it'll all be okay.
Do you have any for me? Do you want to throw any of these out here? Good vibe, bad vibes?
Yeah, I would say, because you've written about this at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you've asked about it now. You heard it talked about a little bit last night. Just your feel for whether or not this offense, good vibe or bad vibe about this offense being okay without Tyler Warren and taking a different track to success in year 2 of Andy Kotelnicki, but year 1 of the post Tyler Warren era.
Yeah. No, I've got good vibes. I got good vibes about this. And here's why. I think that there's an opportunity to build the offense around Drew Aller and not around Tyler Warren. And I know that sounds silly, but when you're designing screen passes and kind of one read plays to get him the football 8 times a game or 5 times a game, whatever it was, there was just so many plays where it was get the ball to Tyler Warren, and then if not, maybe check it down or there's some sort of dump off or throw the ball away. If you can design the offense for Drew Aller to operate it with play action and the run game and throw to a wide delta of receivers where James Franklin has talked about the start of spring ball, we need to make sure we have enough of those guys to spread around the field. That creates an opportunity where the offense can be better from a passing perspective, even without an apex predator like Tyler Warren out there. And so I got good vibes from what I've seen in practice that I think they're going to be able to accomplish that. Some of the tweaks they've made and talking about building on things you're good at is what last week Danny O'Brien was talking about. So I think good, solid, good vibes, not great vibes. If there was a number one receiver that was breaking out and we all saw one-handed catches and stuff, and there was more confirmation of we got a stud at that position, yeah, great vibes, good vibes for sure. I got good vibes about the offense. I don't know if I'm right, but I got good vibes.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I think it would be just taking the only way you could have bad vibes would be to just take a complete pessimistic, this season is not going to go as well as everyone thinks approach. Otherwise, if you look at it in any rational way, I think you would have to feel good about the situation for sure. Let me try. Yeah,
I was going to say, do you have 5 more minutes? Because we do have a couple mailbag questions, and there's some in the chat. I did want to get to that today. If you've got enough time, I don't want to keep you because Greg, believe it or not, is a busy man who's going to be doing a bunch of big boy things, including reporting and writing articles later, while I'm going to be fiddling around with video. So I want to make sure I'm not abusing your time here.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. Let's get into the BWI mailbag. I just want to start with a quick one here. David K. here in the BWI mailbag wants to know what's the rationale behind going to 105. David, it is kind of dumb. So the conversation that, as I understand it, I think James Franklin talked about this, the number is, well, the NFL gets through a season with 53 players on its active roster. So what if you just double that number and -1 and you get to 105?
Yeah. And so I think that's where some of the issue comes here between what you're starting to hear about the judge offering the idea of grandfathering him, these roster limits. And it's funny, I saw a tweet yesterday, it was about wrestling, but basically the gist of it was, all the people involved in this settlement have figured out a whole bunch of large numbers in terms of the money and things like that and who gets what and back pay and this and that. Can't figure out a way to make it work to grandfather, these roster limits in. So
right,
I don't know. We'll see if that changes. Again,
does
all
that have
signs
to do
of this,
with Title IX? So
I don't
this
think
is my
it does.
question.
I just think it could. I just think they've come up with this formula, the math, and this is how they make it all work. Whether it works or not, I don't know. But I think that's where we're at this point.
Why not just go? So there's, how many are there walk-ons plus scholarship players? Like about 115, 120, I want to say, on the roster?
Penn State currently?
No, just generally each year. I want to say like the roster number is typically around 115, 120 players, right? Somewhere in that ballpark?
It's in the ballpark for that, yes. Yep.
Yeah. So we're talking about 10 players. I know that's both a lot and not all that many players. And so I don't understand why you just can't inflate the number to what it's been traditionally for these teams. And I understand you don't want one team to then have 120 scholarship players and every 4-star goes to X school, but that's what NIL was supposed to do. This level the playing field. I don't know. There's always you pull one Jenga block out and then, there's another area to concern. But it just seems like 105, if we're talking about cutting 10 to 15 players, why don't you just meet in the middle and add 10 more slots? That does not seem hard.
No. I guess when you do it across the board for every sport, though, it adds up quickly in terms of the cash involved. And that's where I think the big issue comes in, even though we know that a lot of this has to do with mainly football to begin with. But it's a conversation for a day. We don't have just a couple minutes left in the show. T. Frank, which mailbag question you want to lead us off with here? I see we have a couple.
Let's go to this one because I want to get your perspective on this. Poncho570 asks kind of the question behind the conversation today. Can you explain the value of culture that James Franklin has instilled inside the locker room and why it's been successful and why it's so important not to disturb it with players of a certain ilk? And he's leading to the portal conversation of why is Penn State so careful in the portal to not bring in just anybody. And James Franklin always gives the careful what you wish for line when talking about the portal and some of the false gold that might be out there. And so I think that's kind of the point of this conversation. I cut a bit of this out. And I could have just read the whole thing if I had just not summarized it there, Greg. So what do you think of this particular thought process for Penn State football?
Yeah, I think it's nuanced. I think obviously the first part of it is that some of these decisions they make, I mean, you can say on the surface they might be locker room related, but some of them, let's just be honest, are money related. Either they don't want to or can't afford what some of these guys cost. So that's part of it. Not the biggest part of it, but I don't know how you have this conversation and don't at least acknowledge that some of that is you would take, you might be take a couple risk. If you could, and sometimes they're not in position to do so. But I do think that there's no question that they have built a culture here over the course of James Franklin's tenure, and certainly with the guys on the roster now, the veteran guys who all came back, that it is a tight-knit locker room. And once you upset the apple cart, there's no way to fix it. There just isn't. And I think that King Mack is a great example of this whole thing. James Franklin talked about him last night, that he moved on, and he obviously, I think, probably was a little bummed that he didn't stay. I mean, obviously, he didn't know how things were going to work out when he left for Alabama, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he was a little bummed. James Franklin mentioned the fact that there's no question he saw his teammates, his classmates, what they were able to accomplish last year. And so he wanted to get back in the portal and find something else. And Penn State was more than happy to welcome him back. And that's the kind of thing where, when they talk about the fit and knowing a guy and things like that, he said it was real quick with King Mack once he got in the portal because they knew what they were getting with him. They knew him. Yeah. And so they prefer to go about it that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's part of why the culture is what it is at Penn State. Again, I think, I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth, but would they take more risk if they could? Maybe, probably, maybe not. I don't know. But I do think that what they've built in the locker room is not just lip service. It's not just cliche. It's not just another thing to say at a news conference. It's genuine.
Yeah,
and I think
and they do take risks, right? So they will take risks on players, and we've seen players leave the program, and you don't know you don't know everything about you can't know what's in somebody's soul, right? But you can have do your absolute best to understand a person from what you can gather about them in the recruiting process. The problem with the transfer portal is it is compressed and it's speed dating. Right. So you have even less information and you're going entirely off of tape, basically. And then like people that maybe you can or can't trust giving you feedback, whether or not there's just less time. So the larger point to me is you're talking about culture. They want, and you hear this even at the NFL level, the best teams are player-led, meaning players hold other players accountable, because if you have that sort of grassroots leadership, then coaches don't have to spend all of their time babysitting. They can then go on and do the things that are their job, which is planning to defeat the opponent. If you bring in somebody who, and I've worked at businesses before where everybody didn't like the company. And so does that encourage you to work your hardest to produce the best product? Or does that encourage you to do your own thing and be your own person and look for your own goals over a team-oriented approach? Penn State wants their players to have a team-oriented approach. And look at certain positions that have gone through massive upheaval that everyone's very unhappy about on the Penn State roster. And ask yourself, were they player-led? Did they have the right vibes in that room? This is kind of the conversation. This is the good and the bad. I'm trying to hopefully I painted a clear enough picture for you of how all of that kind of plays out from that perspective. So I guess to me, that's the value of culture is you'll get more out of maybe even slightly less talented players because everyone is working their hardest for the common goal and buying into the program. If you got too many people out there that are loan sharks acting for themselves, going out for theirs, you just don't have the same output overall.
Right. It's a tight balancing act to do. There's no question about it. Tightrope walk. There absolutely is the case. But Penn State has built something it believes is special, and it's going to do what it has to do to keep it that way. With the portal, without the portal, in high school recruiting, so on and so forth. All right, last one, then we got to get out of here. T. Frank, BWI mailbag is Blackheart8541 asks, take the athlete tag off of new Penn State quarterback commit Peyton Falzone, who was ranked as an athlete by On3. That's the context there if you're not aware. And put the quarterback ranking tag on him. Does that change his star ranking? I would assume it's easy to rate him high as an athlete because of his testing numbers, but does that equation or grading scale change as strictly a quarterback, or does it not work that way? T. Frank, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give my opinion on this, and I think that's kind of this idea is expressed in the individual rankings. So let me just share this so you can see it here on the screen if you're watching here on the YouTube show. So he is the 290th player in the On 300 ranking. So a 4-star, but on the lower end of the On 300. And I think that is an accurate place of quarterback and athlete in that kind of context, because I think he's a 4-star quarterback. I think he's a 4-star athlete. You see 247, ESPN, they have him in different places. 247 is the highest on him overall at 176. To me, that's probably a little bit too high for a guy who's a project quarterback, but is insanely talented. So if you're looking at the athlete, I think that's the context here within the rankings and why we do the composite, the national, the On3 industry ranking, and then all of the rankings and kind of the opinions throughout. Now, to me, it does change. If he's a quarterback, that it absolutely changes where he would be in the rankings and how you would rank him in the overall pecking order, because quarterback is both more valuable and a more difficult position. So he has to get in a more rigorous line to get into that top 10 of his position. And so is he the 13th best quarterback in the nation? I don't know that's true, but he's still one of the 300 best players in the country. And so splitting the difference, I think that's where, I respect Charles Power in the way that the guys here rank, because I think they keep all these things in perspective.
They certainly do. You can find more recruiting ranking info at bluewhiteillustrated.com. We've made it 1 hour, 9 minutes, and 5 seconds as I say this on today's episode of BWI Live. No transfer portal entries yet for Penn State on day one of the spring portal window, but we have some updates over at bluewhiteillustrated.com. Go there now to check them out. It's $1 for 1 week of access, and then build annually from there. T. Frank, it's been another fun Wednesday. We'll be back next week, you and I. And you, Ryan, and Sean will be here tomorrow for the recruiting show. We will hear what they have to say as Penn State continues on a big spring recruiting run. And then we'll be blue-white time before we know it. For Thomas Frank Carr, I'm Greg Pickel. We'll talk to you next time.